evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. The FBI conducts raids at homes belonging to a Russian businessman. The Russian's representative says the searches are related to 2 court warrants. A Haitian gang has kidnapped American missionaries and is making demands. They reportedly want $1 million for each person. Washington State University's got a new coach. The former coach has been pink-slipped. The reason? For turning down the vaccine. We hear from scientists and climate researchers who question the climate crisis narrative, pointing to data and findings that are often left out of the climate change discussion. Chinese hackers got into the new iPhone 13 Pro in just 1 second, allowing them remote access to the phone's system. And they won a prize of $300,000 for doing it. The FBI raided 2 homes belonging to the relatives of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska on Tuesday, one in New York and another in Washington. Reuters reports that a representative of Deripaska confirmed these 2 homes belong to his relatives. The representative also said the raids were made on the basis of 2 court warrants related to U.S. sanctions. 53-year-old Deripaska was sanctioned in 2018 for acting on behalf of the Russian government. The FBI hasn't said why they raided the homes. And the Haitian gang that kidnapped U.S. missionaries is reportedly demanding a $1 million ransom per person. Authorities are not sure whether that amount includes the 5 children that they captured. A top Haitian official told the Associated Press someone from the 400 Maozo gang made the demand Saturday. The gang issued the demand over a call to Christian aid ministries right after they abducted the missionaries. The Wall Street Journal first reported on the demand. The age of the adults who were abducted range from 18 to 48, and the children are between 15 years all the way down to 8 months old. The White House said the FBI is working to get the captives to safety, and a Haitian official said the Bureau and Haitian police are in contact with the kidnappers. And a small plane crashed this morning while taking off at Houston Executive Airport in Waller County, Texas. All 21 people on board were safely evacuated, and early reports show that only 1 person was hospitalized. Here's NTD's Chenny Wu with more.
Just after 10 a.m. Central Time this morning, a Boston-bound private plane burst into flames after it crashed during takeoff. According to Waller County Judge Trey Duan, the plane did not take off by the time it reached the end of the runway. It continued across the road before stopping and catching fire. The plane was identified as a McDonnell Douglas MD-87, which has a 127-seat capacity. The plane was reportedly headed to Boston for a trip to the AL Championship Series baseball game. The registered agent of the plane, J. Allen Kent, was reportedly on board. According to Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry, all 18 passengers and 3 crew members were able to get out safely. At least 1 person was transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. While the exact cause of the accident is still unknown, the National Transportation Safety Board is leading the investigation. Chenny Wu, NTD News.
The Washington State Cougars have suffered a big loss. Their coach and several others were pink-slipped for refusing to get vaccinated against COVID-19. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on what happened.
Time's up in Washington State. The COVID-19 vaccine deadline for government workers landed on Monday, and Washington State University's football team felt the hurt. Cougars head coach Nick Rolovich was fired for refusing to get vaccinated. Late Monday, the university's athletics director, Pat Chun, said the school's suffering.
It is disheartening to be here today. Our football team is hurting. Our WSU community is fractured. Today will have a lasting impact on the young men on our team and the remaining coaches and staff.
Chun said Rolovich applied for religious exemption, but a committee rejected his request. The team's former coach was 42 years old and the highest paid state employee. He was supposed to coach until 2025 with an annual salary of more than $3 million. Several other assistant coaches were also fired, all of which has happened at a time when the team is on a roll.
Losing a coach when you have a losing season is not easy. Losing a coach mid-season when you're winning I'm sure is, even more challenging, especially when a lot of those assistant coaches went with them. So obviously,
Gerald Commissiong had played football for Stanford University. He's now the president and CEO of Todos Medical, a medical diagnostics company. Commissiong tells me he believes this fire the unvaccinated approach will cause more harm than good.
How do you think this should have been handled?
Well, I think, if you look at the federal mandate has an out with testing. So certainly that could be a solution. You could have, if you want to do the penalizing aspect of things, you could say, okay, maybe they have to pay for their own testing. But, outside of that, I would think that would be, the recommendation, because that seems to be the standard. Of what's going on. I think vaccine mandates, while certainly are going to show effectiveness in reducing transmission of the virus, there's obviously a lot of resistance. And thinking through ultimately what's going to happen with that resistance, I think it's going to net be more negative for us than positive.
Over the weekend, Rolovich said he believed everything would work out, but he also said he has to move on if it doesn't. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
And Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas tested positive for COVID-19 today. He's fully vaccinated. The Department of Homeland Security says Mayorkas is isolating at home and is experiencing only mild congestion. The secretary was with President Biden and the FBI director at an event in D.C. on Saturday. And Southwest says it won't put unvaccinated workers on unpaid leave if they're waiting for a vaccine exemption. Southwest is a federal contractor, so its employees have to be vaccinated by December 8th unless they have medical or religious reasons. CNBC reports the airline told its employees that if they asked for an exemption but haven't gotten approved by the deadline, they can keep working, wearing masks and following social distancing rules until somebody reviews their requests. Southwest employees will have until November 24th to request an exemption. And former President Donald Trump is filing a lawsuit against the Democratic-led House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol breach and against the National Archives.
Trump has cited executive privilege to keep his presidential records classified. His court filing argues that the records requested by the House Select January 6th committee is too broad and doesn't serve any legislative purpose. The lawsuit also calls the investigation a vexatious illegal fishing expedition.
Look, the January 6th Commission, from the beginning, it has admitted that it is not about the legislative efforts of the Congress. What they have done is made it clear it's a show trial that's meant to damage President Trump.
This lawsuit comes days after the White House press secretary told reporters that the Biden administration would not allow Trump to use executive privilege to block investigation requests.
I think if you look back at past presidents, Democratic and Republican, there isn't really a precedent for what we're talking about with this select committee and what they're trying to get to the bottom of. And the uniqueness of that, I think, is important context.
If I was Joe Biden, I would be thinking to myself, do I really want to put in place waivers of all executive privilege? There's a national security component. There's just a management component. How do you run a business if your competitors can look at what you're doing in every meeting? So there's a balance.
The National Archives is reportedly scheduled to hand over the Trump administration documents next month. President Biden previously cleared those documents for release.
President Biden's energy reform agenda might need to be adjusted, despite progressives pushing for an all-or-nothing deal on climate. Two Democrat senators today say they oppose the carbon tax. Senators Jon Tester and Joe Manchin, who both represent red states, are skeptical of the carbon tax. The tax would charge a fee on companies and consumers who emit carbon dioxide and methane. Senator Tester says he's not a fan because he doesn't think it will work as planned, while Manchin says it's not on the board at all right now. Manchin also rejected the idea of committing billions for a clean electricity program. Congressional Democrats originally wanted banks to report transactions of more than $600 to the IRS. Well, that proposal's changed. Now they want a $10,000 threshold instead. The jump from $600 to $10,000 was endorsed by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She said this reflects the administration's belief that the U.S. should focus on wealthy Americans who don't pay their taxes. Yellen added that the new threshold protects American workers. The $600 threshold met with strong opposition from Republicans. They argued it was intrusive and would not target the wealthy as intended, but would instead go after the majority of Americans. A group of Republican senators expressed dissatisfaction with the revised proposal this afternoon. They said that even with the threshold raised to $10,000, the plan would still hit most Americans and every small business. The Treasury Department says the proposal won't apply to payroll deposits for wage earners. And 17 state attorneys general are defending parent participation and dissent at school board meetings. They sent a letter to the Department of Justice after the DOJ directed the FBI to address an alleged spike in threats against school staff. NTD's Grace Coulter has the details.
A coalition of 17 state attorneys general is demanding the Department of Justice rescind a recent memo. They say the memo would chill lawful dissent by parents voiced during local school board meetings. The coalition sent a letter to the President and U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland on Monday requesting immediate action. The DOJ memo directs the FBI to work with state and local governments to address an alleged spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school staff. The order came after the National School Boards Association urged the Biden administration to invoke counterterrorism laws to handle angry mobs of parents. The attorneys general argue the DOJ's memo doesn't appear to be based on facts, but on a flawed narrative from the School Boards Association. The association describes some disruptions at school board meetings as violent threats akin to domestic terrorism, but the AGs argue the vast majority of these incidents involve disorderly conduct, not threats. They further state that the DOJ memo is likely intimidating to parents. Their letter reads, "We as a country should celebrate their participation in our system of self-government, not silence them by accusing them of domestic terrorism and threaten them with the prospect of the FBI knocking on their door to investigate their activities." In addition, the AGs say there is already sufficient legal remedies available at the local level without the need for FBI intervention. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
The president's nominee for the nation's top banking regulator is refusing to give the U.S. Senate her thesis on Karl Marx. That's according to Republican lawmakers who are concerned about her attitude towards Marxism. But the nominee claims she's being discriminated against due to her ethnicity. NTD's Grace Coulter has the details.
Nominee for Controller of the Currency, Professor Sala Amarova, is refusing to give the Senate Banking Committee her thesis on Karl Marx. A spokesperson for Republicans on the panel told the Epoch Times that Amarova did not hand over the thesis by October 13th, the date set by Senator Pat Toomey. Toomey, the top Republican on the committee, asked Amarova earlier this month for the document and other papers she omitted from a disclosure package. It's standard practice for nominees to turn in complete disclosure packages. But in a recent interview with the Financial Times, Amarova claimed she's being held to a different standard because she's from Kazakhstan, which was part of the Soviet Union when she was born. Amarova told the outlet she's an easy target, an immigrant, a woman, a minority, and said she's easy to demonize and vilify. When asked if some of the criticism against her was racist, Amarova said yes. The Republican spokesperson responded to her comments saying, "What a classic response from the extreme left. When they can't defend their bad ideas, they resort to accusing critics of being racist misogynists." Toomey's expressed that his opposition to Amarova stems from her ideas and policy proposals, not her background. He previously listed examples such as Amarova's positive comments about aspects of the Soviet Union and her support for ending private banking. Amarova's views have also raised concerns from Senator John Tester, a key Democrat on the Banking Committee. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
We have an update on the disgraced South Carolina lawyer Alex Murdaugh. A judge has denied him bond. That's because the judge says Murdaugh has a lot of money and he might be mentally unstable. So the judge says it appears that for now, giving him bond would be too risky. Here's NTD's Kevin Hogan with the details.
The South Carolina lawyer mired in scandals Alex Murdaugh will have to wait in jail until his trial following the judge's decision. Murdaugh faces charges that he stole $3.4 million in insurance money.
I think it's a good day for justice.
Here's the background. One of Murdaugh's housekeepers was Gloria Satterfield. She died in the Murdaugh home in 2018. Her death was said to be the result of a trip and fall accident. The Satterfield estate recovered $4.3 million in insurance money in claims against Murdaugh involving her death. Satterfield's sons were supposed to get the money. But new affidavits allege Murdaugh coordinated with the Satterfield family to sue himself, and furthermore, that he pocketed the money. Murdaugh's mental health was one reason the judge denied him bond. His mental health had come under scrutiny after Murdaugh found his wife and son shot dead on their property in South Carolina.
We knew it was going to be an uphill battle. Obviously, the public interest and the enormity of the accusations. But we're glad that the judge is concerned about his mental condition. And we think we can get him a relatively clean bill of health by the end of this week, early next week, from a psychiatrist based on the 6 weeks of examinations he's had by mental health experts, both at the detox center and the rehab facility.
Murdaugh has denied any involvement in the death of his wife and son, and their deaths are still unsolved, with no one charged. An attorney for the Satterfield family was pleased with the judge's decision to deny bond.
The Satterfields got some taste of justice today, so, thank you, Judge Newman. We would have accepted the ruling of the court no matter what it was, but I really feel like the court appreciated the weight and gravity of this situation. It was important to demonstrate that influence and power does not create a second tier of justice in this state, and I think that weighed heavily on the decision to withhold bond in this case.
But to make matters more complicated, this is only one of 2 multi-million-dollar insurance fraud cases involving Murdaugh. He was accused of hiring a hitman to kill him so his surviving son could get $10 million in insurance money, but the plan was botched as Murdaugh was shot in the head but survived. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
People with hearing loss may soon be able to buy hearing aids without visiting a doctor. The FDA proposed a new rule today that would allow people to purchase the devices without a prescription, an exam, or a fitting. It comes after an executive order from President Biden called for increased competition and access to medical devices. The FDA says out of the 15% of adult Americans who have hearing loss, just 20% use an aid. The proposed rule also aims to make hearing aids more affordable by making them available at more retailers and online. The public can comment on the proposal for 90 days. And addressing climate change is a key priority for the Biden administration and congressional Democrats. But there are scientists and climate researchers countering the narrative on climate change, many of whose voices are suppressed because their views don't align with the accepted narrative. NTD's Melina Wisecup got a chance to speak with some among them at their annual climate conference.
I'm here in Las Vegas where I'm attending an international climate conference. We've heard from scientists, policy advisors, and others who've shared their research on climate change and global warming. Now, these folks here are really challenging the narrative on climate and asking the question, is the world facing a catastrophic climate crisis?
There are plenty, thousands and thousands of scientists who also believe that we're not facing a climate crisis. Yes, temperatures have warmed some during the past century, but that's because we just emerged from the Little Ice Age, which was the coldest period of the past 10,000 years.
All data indicates that the climate is changing, but the question is to what degree, no pun intended.
They call themselves climate realists, and many here affirm the globe is warming now, but they deny that this global warming will kill off the human race and kill the planet. Here's why. This chart suggests that the Earth was once much, much warmer. Around 1000 AD, the temperatures were higher than today, and mankind did live during this time.
The first United Nations climate report in 1990 actually showed the medieval warm period much warmer than current times.
The news will often show, for example, a glacier melting in the Alps, and they'll say, evidence of global warming. What they don't tell you is underneath that glacier, they found a Roman road and a Roman mine. You know, we found villages under permafrost in Greenland that the Vikings settled 1,000 years ago.
This leads to yet another question. If the Earth was hot back then, when there weren't cars and factories, how much of the global warming is man-made and how much of it is natural?
Volcanoes, trees decaying, even with glaciers receding, you have tundra that's now decaying. It's been suppressed under ice for thousands of years. It releases CO2 and other greenhouse gases.
Tilt of the Earth's axis, sun, solar cycles, clouds, water vapor, feedback, volcanoes. And they've tried to simplify this to, essentially, it's our fault.
Our whole Western civilization educational system has become dominated by what philosophers call methodological naturalism. That is, the assumption that everything must be explained solely by reference to empirical causes.
A statistician with the Heritage Foundation took a look at models that the government is using to justify its climate crisis narrative. And he found that the models are incredibly sensitive and could easily be manipulated to justify the climate policies.
The assumptions about climate sensitivity, or how sensitive the planet is to carbon dioxide emissions, is a great example. Basically, in terms of those assumptions, the beliefs about how much the Earth's temperature will warm in response to CO2 emissions are much, much, much higher than what reality would suggest.
Then there is extreme weather. Some say that the more frequent storms and hurricanes is evidence that climate change is catastrophic. 2 hurricane researchers we spoke with, including the former director of the National Hurricane Center, says that there are external factors to consider, such as improved technology, allowing us to see more that we might not have noticed before.
So we're naming more storms, we're observing more storms. We have some storms that we observe now that are a major hurricane, Cat 3, 4, or 5, in the middle of the Atlantic. I don't think they would have even noticed a major storm like that before.
What I would tell you is that all the alarmist statements that are being made about droughts, about sea level rises, about hurricanes, about tornadoes, they're all lies. There has been no trend in that.
And he says he used to believe the catastrophic climate crisis narrative until he started to ask questions and conduct his own scientific research.
Understand that science is not a matter of religion. Science is not a question of faith. Science is a matter that is fact-driven, it's experimentally driven, and science lives on the basis of debate. If somebody tells you that an issue is settled, run. Anybody who's trying to choke off open and free discussion, whether it's in science or in politics or in culture or anything else, has something to hide.
And big tech has already cracked down, Google censoring those who question the climate crisis narrative. Meanwhile, some will continue to forge their own path and try to understand climate change from a different perspective. Reporting in Las Vegas, Nevada, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, a young man was attacked last night after getting off the train in New York City. The attacker used a bottle and cut open the back of the victim's head and neck. NTD had an exclusive interview with the victim. And New York City saw the sharpest increase in murders in the history of the city from 2019 to 2020. And the numbers keep going up. We'll get an expert's analysis in just a moment here on NTD News. A young man was attacked with a bottle while departing a train last night. The attacker struck the back of his head multiple times, cutting the head, neck, and ear. NTD's Jason Perry brings us an exclusive interview with the victim.
The victim wanted to remain anonymous. He said he had just exited the train when a black man began following him, but he didn't pay much attention at first.
I was using my phone, and then he started slowly approaching me. But I still didn't pay attention to that person. When he was really close to me, he suddenly started attacking me with a glass bottle.
The young man was slashed several times to the back of his head and neck, and his right ear was severely cut.
He attacked me several times and then he ran away.
When the young man was treated for his injuries, the doctor told him there are many incidents like this where people are attacked without reason. The young man gave some advice he thinks would help prevent attacks like these from happening to someone else in the future.
Just having a patrolling officer in every station. Sometimes I see officers in the bigger stations, but in small stations, my incident happened in a small station, there aren't officers. So perhaps smaller stations should be paid attention to as well.
After the attack, the victim came up these steps right here, and you can still see some blood on the ground. Fortunately, none of his injuries were life-threatening. The NYPD said that no arrests have been made and that the investigation is still ongoing. Jason Perry, NTD News, New York.
Murders are on the rise in New York City. In fact, the increase from 2019 to 2020 was the sharpest ever in the history of the city. And now in 2021, that rate is increasing yet again. NTD's Arian Pazdar has more.
374 people have been killed in New York City so far this year. That's exactly the same number as that reported for the entire last year, and we still have 2.5 months to go. Now, some people blamed the pandemic for the increase in murders last year, but then why is the number still going up? According to city data, New York City's murder rate spiked by almost 50% from 2019 to 2020. Not even the infamous 70s and 80s saw murder rates going up that fast. So what's causing this steep rise now? According to Mark Ruskin, former assistant district attorney in Brooklyn and author of the book The Pretender, My Life Undercover for the FBI, there are 3 main factors. The first one is bail reform, which took effect in New York City last year.
So it's become much more difficult now for judges to set bond and to set bail.
Many offenders are now being let out instead of being held with bail or bond. He says the second point is the mayor's defunding of the police.
He's cut the budget of the NYPD by $1 billion.
He added the NYPD used to have undercover agents preventing crimes before they happened, but that department was abolished. And lastly, the district attorneys, who are supposed to go after criminals once they have been charged, he says don't always go after the offenders anymore because of political bias.
In some cases, prosecutors who are more politicized and less neutral. A good prosecutor, like a good law enforcement officer, has to be independent and objective and not political.
New York City is going to elect a new mayor in a few weeks. Ruskin said things could be changing after that. Arian Pazdar, NTD News, New York.
Recently, an Australian singer was robbed while visiting San Francisco. San Francisco mayor and its police chief announced a new cash reward system to tackle auto burglaries in the city. We hear more from NTD's David Lamb.
We almost died. Australian singer and TikTok star Clinton Kane was robbed on Friday while visiting the city. After he and his friends parked their car, they noticed the perpetrators breaking into their vehicle. They were held at gunpoint after they chased the perpetrators.
It was very weird. It was very scary having a gun to my face.
In this video, he told local reporter Dion Lim he was on a trip to film a documentary.
First time in my whole life that I've had a gun to my face. I was peeing my pants very aggressively. Not actually, but in my head I was.
$30,000 of gear were stolen. He joked that he'd never go back to San Francisco again after the incident.
Never.
California Proposition 47 is often blamed for the increase in theft. It reduced penalties for thefts under $950. Officials in San Francisco announced on Monday that the series of car break-ins plaguing the popular tourist city are part of organized crime. Mayor Breed announced a $100,000 reward that can lead to the conviction of those involved with auto burglary operations. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Coming up, Chinese hackers have already found a weakness in the new iPhone 13 Pro. It allows remote access to the phone's data. And a Canadian publisher is accusing Twitter of censorship. The tech company suspended his accounts that promote books critical of Beijing. That and more on NTD News after the break.
Secure, the true solution for your digital privacy and security. Secure is a private and secure messaging and email solution hosted in Switzerland, using military-grade encryption and Swiss privacy laws, giving you true privacy. Secure is 100% private and does not collect or sell any of your personal data. Secure's Helix technology connects you securely to our Swiss servers without the need of a VPN, guaranteeing privacy and security for all your communications. Secure Messenger doesn't require your phone number or any personal data that hackers target. Chat by Invites allows you to chat privately and securely with anyone outside of your secure network without the need for others to download Secure. Secure Send offers you a private and secure way to email anyone outside of Secure. You won't find this level of privacy or security on any other email or instant messaging application. Visit secure.com. Regain and protect your privacy today.
You worked hard for your money. You invest in stability for your retirement and your family's future, to build and leave them with something greater. The next unprecedented financial crisis, political misstep, or unstable government can depreciate it all away. It was called the gold standard for a reason. The financial preservation of tomorrow. Diversify your assets against inflation, market volatility, and the unknown with real money. Hedge your wealth with the purest form of money, physical gold and silver. Because any currency printed on paper can be manipulated. What's backing up your IRA? Do what you need to do right now to be prepared with the Reagan Gold Group. Visit now, rggusakit.com, or call us at 866-912-1384. Receive up to $2,500 in free silver coins and a free safe with your new precious metals IRA. Call now.
A recall is underway for a California school board. The city of San Francisco certified it on Monday. At the same time, the district grapples with a budget deficit. Here's NTD's Eileen Ang with more details.
The San Francisco School District is facing not only a recall, but also an uncommon budget deficit. The local Department of Elections has certified petitions to recall 3 school board members, Gabriela Lopez, Allison Collins, and Fauga Maliga. The recall started in February 2020. Supporters criticized the leaders for prioritizing actions like renaming schools instead of reopening schools for in-person instruction. The recall is led by 2 parents in the school district.
And then when we tried to advocate for reopening, what we found was that firstly, the school district the board had completely deprioritized reopening as a topic. So in the meetings that we would attend, it would be the last item of the agenda. So you'd spend like 7 hours or 9 hours literally waiting through a whole bunch of other topics before you even got to talk about reopening or listen to the plans from the board.
In January, the school board was criticized for voting to rename 44 public schools, including George Washington and Abraham Lincoln High Schools, after officials deemed them unworthy of the honor. In April, the board decided to suspend the plan. And that's what we saw consistently. And instead of actually addressing these needs, what we found was that they were constantly spending their energy on symbolic gestures that actually made no difference to the actual education of our kids. If the recall is successful, they hope to run an open process to allow all San Francisco voters to nominate candidates and ask them the hard questions.
Things like, what are you going to do about this huge budget deficit? How are you going to handle that? Have maybe 4 or 5 questions like that. And let people comment on the candidates and vote on them. And then anyone who kind of clears the basic bar where we think this person would do a good job, suggest a pool of candidates to the mayor, like not just 3 people, but hopefully 9 to 12 people to the mayor so that she can choose between them.
The San Francisco Unified School District has also been facing a budget deficit. SFUSD received $140 million this year in federal funding to help recover from the pandemic and its $100 million deficit. On October 5th, SFUSD held a special meeting to address the fiscal crisis. It states that zero-based budgeting will be their primary plan, which has been discussed for over a year. The California Department of Education informed NTD that the 2021 to 2022 budget for SFUSD is approved and is assigning a fiscal expert to help the district reach a fiscal stabilization plan. A deputy legislative analyst also informed NTD that in rare cases when a school district can't pay its bills, it can request for an emergency state loan, which consists of costs over a 20-year period. During this time, the administrator has full control over the district's budgets and policies. School board members in these districts lose all decision-making authority and any compensation. The deadline for paid arguments against the school board recall is November 29th, 2021. A special election to keep or remove the 3 school board members will be held on February 15th, 2022. Eileen Ang, NTD News, California.
California has seen a few years lacking in rainfall recently. However, 2021 is the driest recorded in the state's history in almost 100 years. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
California just recorded its 2nd driest year ever in terms of precipitation. The report released by the California Department of Water Resources said that 8 areas, including Sacramento, San Francisco, and LA, had less than 50% of their average precipitation for the year.
In April, we initiated our first proclamation of a state of emergency related to this year's drought.
In April, California Governor Gavin Newsom urged Californians to voluntarily reduce water usage by 15%, to help protect water reserves.
Not only on residences, but industrial, commercial operations, and agricultural operations. We are encouraging people to do common sense.
The dry weather is also contributing to wildfires. The state's firefighting agency, CAL FIRE, says that almost half of the 20 largest fires recorded have happened since 2020. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti said in a statement in August, "This year we are seeing more of the ingredients that fuel fires." The 2021 water year recorded 11.87 inches of precipitation. The lowest amount happened in 1924 with 9.4 inches. The state's annual average is about 23.6 inches. Jason Blair, NTD News, California.
A second brokerage in 2 weeks is expecting Apple to sell fewer iPhones than expected, even with the holiday season quickly approaching. NTD's Phil Zhou has the story.
JP Morgan says Apple will sell fewer iPhones than expected this holiday season because of the chip shortage. The firm estimates $63 billion in sales for iPhones in the first quarter of 2022, a 4% yearly drop.
Apple is not immune to the chip shortage, and we've seen that play out.
Many expected the tech giant to sell 90 million iPhones in the first quarter. But now analysts from Needham and Refinitiv expect that figure to drop by up to 10 million units. What does this mean for consumers? Daniel Ives is managing director at Wedbush Securities in New York.
Yeah, I think consumers that wait past the first week in December, you won't be seeing any iPhones under the Christmas tree.
Ives expects Apple fans who are planning on getting an iPhone to order by Thanksgiving. But he says Apple is already ahead of the curve, beating chip-making companies like Intel at their own game.
You see Tesla, Google, and others, Samsung following their lead. They're cutting out the middle person, which is the chip makers. And this chip shortage has been, unprecedented. Taking control of having their own chips, especially given this chip shortage, has been a wake-up call to technology and automobile players around the globe.
Apple recently released new MacBook Pro laptops with 2 new M1 chips, which are supposed to have better performance while using less power. Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
At an annual hacking competition in China, the new iPhone 13 Pro has just been hacked. The team showed off their hack live on stage. It took them all of 1 second to gain remote access to an iPhone 13's data. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has the story.
Chinese hackers have already hacked the new iPhone 13 Pro, even with the phone running the latest software. The hackers used an exploit in the iPhone Safari web browser. With just 1 click of the hacker's link, they can gain remote access to a user's iPhone system. This hack reportedly allows the hackers to gain access to user information, such as photos and messages. It also allows them to remotely delete user data. The hackers performed the trick live on stage as part of an annual public hacking competition in China. They won the top prize of $300,000 for being able to hack the phone in just 1 second. The competition is called the Tianfu Cup, and the event itself is legal. The details of the exploits presented in the competition will be reportedly given to Apple so that the company can release updates to fix the vulnerabilities. But because the hacking event was organized and held in China, Beijing may be able to gain access to the exploits. It's unclear if the organizers can refuse Chinese authorities if the authorities ask them to hand over the details of the vulnerabilities. In fact, there have been past reports that the exploits presented at the hacking competition were used outside of the competition for malicious purposes. In 2019, Google published an analysis into a hacking campaign that revealed an exploit that targeted iPhones en masse. The exploit was the same as the one presented at the Chinese hacking competition. An article by MIT says that ethnic Uyghurs were targeted. The article says that the Chinese hacking competition emerged in China soon after the Chinese regime banned cybersecurity researchers from attending overseas hacking competitions. Fall is harvest season, but this year, as China experienced multiple extreme weather events, including widespread summer flooding, frost, and typhoons, most crops farmers were about to collect were ruined. In late July, heavy rainfall and extensive flooding hit central China's Henan province, the second most productive province for agriculture in China. It grows about 30% of China's wheat and 10% of its corn. This has sparked fears of the impact on the country's food supplies. However, China's officials seem optimistic. Last week, the state's agriculture officials said the floods had little impact on grain production, adding there would be a bumper harvest this year. But just a month ago, a Henan official said there would be a certain degree of yield reduction in fall. And farmers in Henan also questioned the claim, saying how could the authorities estimate a bumper harvest when the autumn harvest is not over yet? According to the South China Morning Post, close to 1 million hectares of crop fields have been affected by the floods in Henan. While the region's summer grain harvest has finished, autumn grain production, in particular corn and other vegetables, are yet to be harvested. Crops still in the field are especially at risk. That's because the region's flooding has been exacerbated by upstream dam discharge, meaning the water over crops in some low-lying areas is relatively deep and has been for some time. The disaster may also cause severe damage to the storage, transportation, and processing of harvested grains. Although Beijing appeared to respond to the crisis with ease, it's also trying to boost grain imports.
Another allegation against big tech. A publisher spoke to NTD about his concerns after Twitter suspended his accounts. NTD's Juliet Song has the details.
A message, quite frankly.
A Canadian publisher is voicing concerns about alleged big tech censorship. This after Twitter suspended his accounts promoting books that are critical of the Chinese Communist Party.
I think it's a significant issue for all publishers and anybody who is attempting to bring different voices to the table for the public.
And Baxendale owns a publishing agency in Canada. This October, Twitter suspended 6 accounts associated with his business. Baxendale uses these accounts to promote books that expose Beijing's influence operations in the West, like this one called Willful Blindness,
which is really an understanding of the of transnational organized crime, money laundering in Canada, and the connections to senior officials within the Chinese Communist Party. And also their corruption and influence in the Canadian political apparatus.
Another example is Hidden Hand, a book that digs into Beijing's infiltration activities in North America.
And how China has been very successful or the Chinese Communist Party has been very successful in co-opting elites in the West, to support their initiatives and their ambitions.
Baxendale's allegation comes amid a controversy over the power of big tech companies. In April, the Indian government asked Twitter to remove tweets criticizing its pandemic response. And in July, Twitter temporarily restricted a New Zealand professor's account after she mocked Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping. As for Baxendale's case, Twitter says his business accounts violated their rules, including using multiple accounts to create fake engagement. The tech company eventually restored all the suspended accounts after his appeal.
But with a stern warning, suggesting that should I be promoting content that did not meet their guidelines, whatever those guidelines are for free speech and free and fair speech, that I would face permanent suspension.
Baxendale says Twitter is vague about their guidelines.
I asked them very specifically to address that, and they would not address it.
Baxendale says he's concerned about Twitter's actions, and that it's a significant issue for free and fair speech around the world, since publishers have the role of informing the public and letting them make their own decisions. NTD has contacted Twitter for comment, but has not received a response before airtime. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Coming up, with the United Nations Climate Change Conference fast approaching, the British government announces billions in green tech investments, including a multi-million-dollar partnership with Bill Gates. And if dogs are a man's best friend, Robo-Dogs might just be a soldier's best companion on the battlefield. A defense trade fair in Paris showcased future technologies for armed forces. That and more in just a moment here on NTD News. Today, the UK announced billions in investments in green technology, including a partnership with Microsoft's co-founder. NTD's Malcolm Hudson in London reports.
Speaking at the Global Investment Summit in London, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates announced a £400 million partnership to boost green technologies. They said the aim is to bring down the cost of green tech to help countries achieve net zero emission targets by 2050.
We'll be funding these projects jointly next year. The UK's already got a number of applications coming in. We have lots of small companies that are inventing better technology for doing these things. So over the next 5-year period, we expect at least one of these technologies will be ready to scale, and over the next decade that all of them will be.
Johnson noted a number of areas they wanted to focus on.
What we want to support is direct air capture, long-term battery life, jet zero, and green hydrogen. I think these are all technologies that have massive potential, but they're currently underinvested in by comparison with some others.
Direct air capture is technology that captures CO2 directly from the atmosphere. Jet zero is the goal of net zero emission aviation through sustainable fuels. And green hydrogen is a way to store energy from renewable sources.
Now, what government has to do is as far as we can, de-risk those investments, not just in the UK, but around the world. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be the secret of COP, to be absolutely frank, and for tackling climate change in the future.
At the summit, 12 of the UK's leading green innovators demonstrated their technology to international investors. The government said it has attracted nearly £10 billion to fund its green regeneration agenda. It estimates these investments will create 30,000 new jobs. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
In Strasbourg's European Parliament, the EU's top official locked horns with Poland's Prime Minister over a Polish court ruling. The European Commission president outlined consequences facing Poland, including a suspension of voting rights, with the Polish Prime Minister responding that blackmail must not be part of policymaking. Here's NTD's Joy Dogood with more.
The President of the European Commission clashes with the Polish Prime Minister in European Parliament on Tuesday. Ursula von der Leyen says she's deeply concerned by Poland's Constitutional Court's ruling that the country's laws take precedence over the EU laws.
The rule of law is the glue that binds our union together. It is the foundation of our unity. It is essential for the protection of the values on which our union is founded. Honourable members, we cannot and we will not allow our common values to be put at risk. The Commission will act.
She lists 3 potential consequences, including continuing to hold up Poland's access to the EU Pandemic Recovery Fund and suspending payments of EU money to Poland. More seriously, Poland's voting rights could be suspended. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki says Poland will not be intimidated by threats.
Odrzucam język gróźb, pogróżek i wymuszeń.
I reject the language of threats and fait accompli. I will not have EU politicians blackmail Poland. Blackmail must not be a method of policy conducted vis-à-vis certain member states. That is not what democracies do.
Morawiecki insists that Poland abides by EU treaties and brushes off comments about a possible Polexit. But he explains the Polish government's understanding of the rule of law.
Prawo unijne wyprzedza prawo krajowe.
EU law has primacy over national law within areas delegated by a member state. This principle is recognized in all member states. But the highest law in the EU is a constitution of a country. If an EU institution transgresses or infringes the delegated competences, then a member state must have tools to be able to react.
Morawiecki also criticizes the European Court for making decisions behind closed doors.
EU competences have clear boundaries. We must not remain silent when those boundaries are breached. So we are saying yes to European universalism, but we say no to European centralism.
Poland joined the EU in 2004. Relations between the country and the EU reached a new low earlier this month. Joy Dogood, NTD News.
In Paris, a defense showcase for the future of warfare technology. Among the exhibits, a robotic dog, which could be a great asset for military interventions. Here are the details.
What if this four-legged machine is the biggest asset for militaries on the battlefield? These so-called Robo-Dogs stole the limelight at the Milipol Defense and Security Trade Fair near Paris on Tuesday. This is Ghost Robotics Vision 60. Though it might not answer if you call its name, it has advanced functions, such as a sensor, the ability to keep its balance on difficult terrain, and a battery that allows it to walk continuously for 3 hours.
It really can be used to save lives, so in dangerous situations where you need to enter a building and there's an unknown threat in the building, better to put the robot in to go first, to inspect, do some reconnaissance.
The robotic dog costs under $1 million, according to Ghost Robotics Special Projects head Tom Jacobs. The robot can also be remote controlled, carry rifles on its back, and participate on the battlefield. It can operate in contaminated areas or do anything a human would find boring.
It's all of the dull, dirty, and dangerous situations. So anything boring or...
The 22nd edition of Milipol Paris takes place from October 19th to 22nd and plays host to dozens of countries, including Israel, United States, and Switzerland.
The world's oldest book fair is back as an in-person event this year. The 73rd Frankfurt Book Fair is opening its doors to the public today. That's after going almost fully digital last year due to the pandemic. The book fair is still somewhat scaled back. Many events or presentations will be online. Fewer international exhibitors and authors will be attending compared to before the pandemic. Travel restrictions will also be keeping many large publishing houses and big-name writers away, particularly from the U.S., Asia, and South America. There will be more than 1,500 exhibitors from more than 70 countries, and 200 authors are traveling to Frankfurt. In comparison, in 2019, the book fair had 7,500 exhibitors from over 100 countries. Canada is the guest country this time. They are sending a delegation of Canadian authors. The book fair runs until Sunday. And coming up, filming in space. A Russian director and an actress went to great lengths to capture a scene for a movie that takes place off of Earth. They share what it's like to make a movie in space. That and more here on NTD News.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm going to pass the savings directly on to you. Go to MyPillow.com right now to get deep discounts on all MyPillow products. For example, you can get my premium MyPillows, regularly $69.98, now just $29.98, the lowest price ever.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
A Russian director and an actress are returning to Earth after shooting the first movie in space. They spent 12 days aboard the International Space Station. Now, the director says he's up for making a movie on the moon or even Mars.
Russian director Klim Shimpenko said on Tuesday the trip to space transformed his ideas about the possibilities of cinema. Shimpenko and actress Yulia Peresild returned to Earth on Sunday after gathering more than 30 hours of material for the first movie filmed in space, The Challenge.
We believe space cinema should be filmed in space. If it's about the moon, let's go to the moon. If it's Mars, let's go to Mars. Why not? Why should cinema be filmed in a studio?
The director says the experience taught him new ways of making a movie. Some scenes that he imagined one way on Earth came together completely differently in space.
Once you are there, you see that they can play face to face, but one of them is head up and the other is horizontal. and the camera can be on a different plane, and that transforms your consciousness completely.
In the movie, Paraselt plays a doctor who is asked to travel to the space station to save an astronaut's life. She says the first sight through the porthole was a huge discovery, and she couldn't believe it was real.
Every second was a discovery until the last day. That's why it was so sad for me to leave, because nowhere else can you do so many discoveries per unit of time. And of course, we didn't have enough time to discover it all. There was more to explore and develop.
Shimpenko says work on the movie would continue until the end of next year, and the space scenes would probably make up 25 to 35 minutes of the final cut. No date has been set for the release, but there might be teasers released in advance from the space segment.
Drone footage shot on Sunday gives a unique view of what the statue of Horatio Nelson sees from London's Trafalgar Square. Erected in 1843, Nelson's column is one of the city's most famous landmarks. Commemorating Nelson's victory over the French at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, the statue stands at approximately 170 feet high. From the early Industrial Revolution to the age of the Internet, it has watched over a spectacular transformation of London's skyline. Behind the statue is the digital heart of the city, the Telecom Tower, and the City of London to its left. The city eagerly awaits the return of the millions of tourists who contribute almost £2 billion to the country's economy and keep 20,000 people and jobs. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Before you go, here's something you should know. Don't forget you can catch all of NTD's programs on television. NTD Business premieres live Mondays through Fridays at 5 p.m. We broadcast to many of your favorite platforms, Apple TV and Roku, for example. We're also rapidly growing on cable, satellite, and over-the-air all across the United States. Just go to ntd.com/TV, type in your zip code, and find all the ways you can watch NTD.